Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Clara Johnson had it all: a successful career, a loving husband, and the dream house she'd worked so hard to achieve. But behind closed doors, a web of lies and betrayal was slowly unraveling. In a world where trust was everything, Clara was about to learn a painful lesson about love, family, and the price of success. This is her story of heartbreak, strength, and redemption. Remember to subscribe to start the story today with life stories. I never thought I'd own my dream house at 29. But here I was, standing in front of a beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch. It seemed surreal, yet it was real. My name is Clara Johnson, and this house was a testament to everything I'd worked for. The years of sleepless nights, long hours at the investment firm, and sacrifices I made to get to this moment. Derek, my husband, was standing beside me, his hand in mine as we looked at the house that was now ours. I can't believe it, I said, my voice filled with excitement. This is it. What do you think? Derek smiled, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners. There was no hint of doubt or hesitation in his gaze. It's perfect. Babe, you did good. I squeezed his hand tighter. I had worked so hard for this. Derek had always been supportive of my career and never once seemed threatened by my success. There was no jealousy in him, no resentment for my achievements. I'd always admired that about him. He worked as a high school teacher, and while his salary wasn't nearly as high as mine, he never complained. He was always so easygoing, so content with the life we were building together. When I told him that I wanted to buy the house with my own money, and that I wanted the deed to be in my name, he hadn't flinched. You earned it, he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Besides, I'm saving up for our future kids' college fund. We're a team, right? That was Derek for you. No ego, no pride getting in the way. Just unconditional support. I loved him for that. But little did I know, there was a part of him that wasn't as secure as it seemed. A part of him that wanted to pretend the house was his, not mine. But that was for later. For now, everything felt right. As we stood there on the driveway, staring at the house that was ours, I couldn't help but feel like I had everything I'd ever wanted. I'd worked hard, and now, it was all paying off. We moved in a few days later. The house was everything I dreamed of. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with stainless steel appliances, and a backyard that was perfect for future barbecues and kids' birthday parties. I had made sure to put down enough for the down payment so that the monthly mortgage payments wouldn't strain us too much. Being an investment manager had taught me the importance of living within our means. I wanted to make sure we could afford everything and still have room to save for the future. You know what we should do? Derek asked as we unpacked boxes in the kitchen, his voice filled with excitement. We should have dinner with my parents this weekend. They'll want to see pictures of the house. That's a great idea, I agreed. Unwrapping our wedding china. We should visit my family too. It'll be nice to show them the house. That evening, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Everything was perfect. The house, our plans for the future, our life together. Derek and I talked about how we would decorate the rooms, where to plant a garden in the spring, and which bedroom we would turn into a nursery when we decided to start our family. I had never felt so at peace in my life. Later that night, as I lay in bed, listening to Derek's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't believe how lucky I was. I had a beautiful home, a loving husband, and a future that seemed filled with endless possibilities. I drifted off to sleep, thinking about how everything had fallen into place. But little did I know, that perfect picture I had painted in my mind was about to unravel in the most unexpected way. The first dinner with Derek's parents was supposed to be a simple celebration of our new home. Martha and George had always been kind to me, treating me like their own daughter ever since Derek and I started dating 5 years ago. They lived in a modest ranch-style house across town, and Martha had prepared her famous pot roast for the occasion. The dinner was warm, familiar, and filled with love, but when Derek spoke up, things took a strange turn. So, tell us all about the house, Martha exclaimed, passing the mashed potatoes. Her gray hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun. her eyes sparkling with excitement. I opened my mouth to answer. But before I could say anything, Derek beat me to it. Actually, I wanted to surprise you guys, he said, his voice filled with pride. I bought us this amazing house. 4 bedrooms, a beautiful backyard. You're going to love it when you see it. I nearly choked on my water. My heart raced, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Derek squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes pleading with me to stay quiet. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced a smile, fighting back the flood of emotions that surged within me. Oh, Derek, that's wonderful, Martha said, clasping her hands together. Isn't that wonderful, George? George beamed at his son, clearly proud. That's my boy, he said. Always knew you'd do well for yourself. Then, turning to me, he added, you've got yourself quite a generous husband here, Clara. Not many young men these days can afford to buy a house like that. I nodded mechanically, pushing food around my plate. The pot roast, which had smelled so delicious only minutes ago, now felt like lead in my stomach. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Derek spoke about how he'd saved up for the down payment, how his parents praised him for his financial responsibility, while I sat there, feeling like I was in some bizarre alternate reality. In that moment, I realized that the house, the life we had built, was not the fairy tale I thought it was. The drive home that night was silent. Neither of us spoke as we pulled into our driveway, the one that, unbeknownst to Derek's family, was entirely paid for with my money. The house where I had imagined our future together, where I thought we would build a life full of love and memories. But now, everything felt tainted. The weight of what had just happened, what had been said, hung between us like an unspoken truth. As soon as we entered the house, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to Derek, my voice shaking. What the hell was that? I demanded. Derek ran his hands through his dark hair, a nervous habit I had noticed early in our relationship. I'm sorry, Clara, he said, his voice strained. You know my dad. He's old-fashioned. He would never understand a man living in a house his wife bought. It would kill him. And my reputation. Your reputation? I echoed, disbelief flooding my veins. What about mine, Derek? I worked for this. It's my house. I know, he said, lowering his gaze. But please, Clara, just let people think I bought it. It doesn't hurt anyone. It makes things easier for everyone. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. The thought of pretending to be something we weren't was suffocating. But looking at Derek, I saw the pleading in his eyes. The vulnerability. I knew that, deep down, this wasn't just about the house. This was about his fear of losing control, of not living up to some imagined expectation of what a man should be. But it hurt. It hurt more than I could explain. Knowing that the man I loved, the man who had always supported me, was now asking me to lie for him. I sighed, my shoulders sagging. Fine, I said quietly. Whatever makes you happy. It was hard to say those words. To let go of what I felt was right. But at that moment, it felt like the only option. A week later, we sat in my parents' living room. And history repeated itself. My mom and dad, along with my younger sister, Katie, were there. Katie had always been the free spirit between us, while I was the practical one who worked in finance. She had bounced from job to job, always trying to find herself, but never staying in one place for too long. Her apartment downtown had been her latest attempt to build a life. But now, she was home, visiting for the weekend. Derek bought us this amazing house, he said, his voice oozing pride, as he spoke to my parents. 4 bedrooms, a beautiful backyard. You're going to love it. I could feel the tension building in my chest as I looked at Katie. She smiled, of course, and congratulated Derek. But there was something in her eyes, something I had seen before. It was jealousy, barely masked by that smile. Katie had always dreamed of the perfect life, the perfect house, and now, it seemed like I was living the life she had always wanted. But it wasn't just about the house. Katie had always been envious of my career success, the stability I had built for myself. She resented how easy it seemed for me, how I always seemed to have everything figured out. In her eyes, I was the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the one who had it all together. And she wanted it. She wanted what I had. Even if it meant taking it from me. That night, as I lay in bed next to Derek, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to change. I had seen the way Katie looked at me. The way she envied everything I had built for myself. The house. The career. The life Derek and I had together. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was becoming hers too. But what hurt the most was that Derek seemed oblivious to it all. I had never imagined that Katie's jealousy would extend to our home. To everything we had worked so hard for. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. That nagging sense that something wasn't right. And yet, I couldn't ignore it. Something was changing, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. It wasn't long before the unease that had been slowly building in our home began to reach a breaking point. For a while, I had hoped that things would settle. That Katie would find her footing. And the jealousy would fade. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. It was impossible to ignore the subtle barbs she kept throwing my way. Her comments about how I ran the house. How she did things better than I did. Stung. But I tried to let them go. Thinking it was just her way of being overly familiar. Still, it was hard. The comparisons between Katie and me were endless. And they were only getting worse. Every morning, she would bring Derek his coffee. Setting it down in front of him with a little flourish. Black. With just a hint of sugar. Just the way you like it. She would say, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Then, she would glance at me and add, "Robin always makes it too sweet. Doesn't she?" It was harmless, I told myself at first. Just playful banter. But then it started to bother me more than I cared to admit. Her tone. The way she would act like the perfect housekeeper. The perfect wife, always doing things that I had always taken pride in doing for Derek. Began to feel like a silent challenge. I was losing ground in my own home. And I couldn't stand it. One evening, after a particularly pointed remark about the kitchen being properly organized since she moved in, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew I had to say something. "Katie," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk for a minute?" She looked at me, her face feigning innocence. "What's wrong, Clara?" she asked, the mock sweetness in her tone sending a chill down my spine. These comments, they're starting to get under my skin. The little jabs, the comparisons. "It's not funny anymore," I said, my voice tight. Katie laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, Clara, you're being way too sensitive. I'm just joking around. Don't tell me you're actually jealous of me doing some housework. It's not that big of a deal." I wanted to scream, but I held it in. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, it was a different story. This wasn't just about housework. It wasn't about who did the dishes or who made the coffee. It was about control. About how Katie had started to feel like she belonged here more than I did. As the days went by, it only got worse. The comments were more frequent, more pointed. I tried to ignore them, tried to carry on as normal, but it felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Then came the day that shattered everything. I came home from work to find Katie in the kitchen, wearing nothing but a sheer tank top and tiny shorts that left little to the imagination. Derek was sitting at the counter, working on his laptop, his eyes drifting toward her. My heart sank as I watched the scene unfold before me. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. I had known something was off between them. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. "Katie," I hissed, pulling her into the hallway. "What the hell are you wearing? That's not appropriate. It's hot in here," she protested, her eyes flashing with defiance. But I saw that little smirk on her face. The one that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. "Go change," I said, my voice icy. She rolled her eyes but complied, changing into her usual loungewear. Later that evening, as Derek and I were getting ready for bed, he brought it up. "Don't you think you were a little harsh on Katie earlier?" he asked, climbing into bed beside me. I stared at him, my heart pounding. She was practically naked. "Derek, what's wrong with you? Why are you defending her? She's just comfortable around family," he said, almost dismissively. "It's her home too now, Clara." That last sentence hit me like a slap to the face. Her home too now. When had that happened? The realization crashed over me. Katie wasn't just invading our space physically. She was trying to take over my life, my marriage, my home, and Derek was letting her. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep, my mind racing with all the things I had tried to ignore. This wasn't just about a few comments or a misplaced gesture. This was about the fundamental changes in my life that I couldn't ignore any longer. Katie had crossed a line. And Derek, my husband, my partner, wasn't even aware of it. The next morning, I confronted Katie, my voice as calm as I could muster. Have you started looking for apartments yet? I asked, keeping my gaze steady on her. Her face immediately crumpled. Robin, I'm trying, but I can barely save anything with my hours being cut. Everything's so expensive. Then why don't you stay with Mom and Dad? I suggested, my voice sharp. They have a spare room. And their house is on the other side of town. It would be better for you. Katie shook her head, her eyes pleading. Your place is perfect, Robin. It's close to everything. And you have all this space. I'll help. I just need a little time to figure things out. I hesitated. I wanted to say no. To tell her to find somewhere else to stay. But my heart softened, and I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I just nodded. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something I couldn't undo. Katie wasn't just my little sister anymore. She was becoming someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. The truth had finally come to light. And there was no turning back. As I stood in the doorway, staring at the broken fragments of everything I once believed to be true, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I had worked so hard for everything I had. And now it was all slipping through my fingers. Derek and Katie, my own sister, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. My entire world, the life I had carefully built, had come crashing down around me. Yet, even in the pain, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was no longer bound by the lies or the expectations of others. The house, the money, the marriage, they had all become shackles. And now, as I watched Derek and Katie scramble to gather their things, I realized that I was finally free. You're not welcome here anymore, I said, my voice cold and firm. I want both of you out. Now. As they left, Derek's face pale with shame, Katie's anger simmering beneath the surface. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my life. I had been living for others for far too long, putting their needs before my own, trying to keep everyone happy. But no more. In the days that followed, I cut ties with my family. I filed for divorce and started over. It wasn't easy, but I found strength in knowing I had made the right choice. I focused on my work, redecorated my home, and took the time to rediscover who I was outside of the roles I had been forced to play. As time passed, I realized that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you need to keep. And that was the greatest lesson of all. Remember to subscribe for more life stories.